Beyond the boundaries of our world, some stories define what it means to be human. This is Of the World, Missions Beyond Earth. April 13th, 1970. 200,000 miles from Earth, a spacecraft is dying. An oxygen tank has exploded. The main power supply is bleeding into space. 3 astronauts, Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes, are watching their instrument panels go dark, one system at a time. They are closer to the moon than to the Earth. There is no way to turn around. There is no rescue ship, and in approximately 3 hours, their command module will be completely dead. Jack Swigert keys the radio. "Houston, we've had a problem." 5 words. The most understated distress call in the history of human exploration. This is the story of Apollo 13, the mission that failed its way to glory. By April of 1970, going to the moon had become routine. At least, that is what America believed. When Apollo 13 launched from Kennedy Space Center, none of the 3 major television networks carried the liftoff live. A manned mission to the moon, and the country changed the channel. The crew was commanded by Jim Lovell, the most experienced astronaut in the program, who had flown to the moon on Apollo 8 and dreamed of walking on its surface. The command module pilot was Jack Swigert. A last-minute replacement added 72 hours before launch. The lunar module pilot was Fred Hayes. Their destination, the Frey Morrow Highlands. At launch, everything was perfect, and for 55 hours, Apollo 13 was the smoothest mission NASA had ever flown. At 55 hours and 54 minutes, Jack Swigert stirred the oxygen tanks. 16 seconds later, oxygen tank number 2 exploded. The blast ripped open a panel of the service module, damaging the remaining tank, severing fuel cell lines, and venting their oxygen into space. Swigert felt the bang before he heard it, as warning lights flooded the instrument panel in amber and red. Swigert radioed, "Houston, we've had a problem." Lovell's voice followed. "We've had a main bus B undervolt. In mission control, telemetry screens showed dropping oxygen and failing power." Flight Director Gene Kranz looked at his team and said, "Let's work the problem." Within 90 minutes of the explosion, the command module Odyssey was dying. Its fuel cells were starving for oxygen, and the crew had to abandon ship. The lunar module Aquarius was designed to support 2 men for 33 hours, not 3 men for 4 days. Yet it was their only lifeboat. Lovell and Hayes powered it up in 15 minutes, a sequence that normally took 2 hours, cross-referencing checklists and flipping switches. Then they had to power down Odyssey to preserve battery power for re-entry. John Aaron in Mission Control calculated a bare minimum power-down procedure that had never been tested. The command module went dark, leaving the 3 astronauts floating in the cold, 200,000 miles from home. Though they had power, carbon dioxide was building. The lunar module's filters were saturated. The command module had plenty of spare canisters, but they were square, while the lunar module's receptacles were round. A square peg in a round hole. On the ground, a team of engineers in Building 7 was given a pile of identical onboard materials: cardboard, plastic bags, suit hoses, and duct tape. They had to build an adapter that would fit a square canister into a round receptacle using only those materials. They built it, radioing instructions to the crew. The astronauts assembled the contraption, nicknamed the mailbox. It worked, the CO2 levels dropped, and they could breathe. To survive, they had to sacrifice almost everything. They powered down every system that was not absolutely essential. The cabin lights and heaters went off, and the temperature inside the spacecraft dropped to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Water condensed on every surface, and the walls wept. The astronauts rationed water to 6 ounces per day. Food was cold and hard to prepare, leaving them nauseated. Fred Hayes developed a kidney infection from dehydration. Swigert's feet went numb, and Lovell lost 14 pounds. Sleep was nearly impossible. The cold was relentless. The men curled into the tunnel between the modules, shivering through the longest nights of their lives. Yet they had to remain sharp enough to execute precise navigation maneuvers. One mistake would send them drifting into oblivion. They could not turn around. The laws of orbital mechanics do not allow a U-turn in space. The only way home was forward, around the far side of the moon. Passing behind the moon, they lost radio contact with Earth. The three astronauts looked out the window at the lunar surface, passing just 158 miles below, the surface Lovell had dreamed of walking on. He would never set foot there. No astronaut named Lovell ever would. Emerging, they fired the lunar module's descent engine for 4 minutes and 23 seconds, a burn calculated by hand and verified by slide rule in mission control. This was the PC+2 maneuver, a course correction that would accelerate their return and shift their splashdown point from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, where recovery ships were waiting. The burn had to be perfect. If the engine fired too long, they would skip off the Earth's atmosphere and tumble into deep space forever. If it fired too short, they would come in too steep and burn up on re-entry. The engine shut down within 1 second of the planned duration. The trajectory was on the mark, but they were still 2 days from home. On April 17th, the crew began the re-entry sequence. First, they jettisoned the service module. Lovell looked out the window and finally saw the damage. An entire panel had been blown away, and wiring hung from the wound. Lovell radioed Houston. "There's one whole side of that spacecraft missing." Next, they transferred back into the frozen command module Odyssey. If a single circuit shorted from the moisture coating every surface, the command module would remain a tomb. They powered it up successfully. They released Aquarius, the lifeboat that had saved their lives. Lovell watched it drift away and said, "Farewell, Aquarius, and we thank you." They were falling toward Earth at 25,000 miles per hour, with the heat shield their only barrier. At 142 hours, Odyssey hit the atmosphere. Re-entry plasma blocked all radio communication. This blackout normally lasted 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Mission control waited. 3 minutes passed, 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes. Capcom Joe Kerwin called into the void. Odyssey, Houston standing by. Silence. The clock ticked past 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Engineers began to consider the possibility that the heat shield had failed and that the crew had burned alive. Then, through the static, "Okay, Joe," it was Sweigert's voice. The room erupted. Odyssey splashed down in the Pacific on April 17th, and 3 men climbed out of their coffin alive. In the years that followed, Gene Kranz was asked how he kept his team focused during those 87 desperate hours. His answer became legendary: "Failure is not an option." Those 5 words were a statement of engineering philosophy. When lives depend on your decisions, you do not accept failure as a possible outcome. You work the problem until the problem is solved. Apollo 13 never landed on the moon, but it became a triumph of human ingenuity. Lovell later called it a successful failure. Only Odyssey survived. Coated in frost, its systems had been restarted by procedures written in a single night. Today, it sits in the Kansas cosmosphere, bearing the scorch marks of re-entry. Apollo 13 taught humanity something that no successful mission ever could: that the measure of a civilization is not only what it achieves, but what it refuses to lose. 3 men should have died in April of 1970. They did not, because thousands of engineers, mathematicians, and flight controllers decided that death was not an acceptable outcome, and then proved it with slide rules, duct tape, and 4 days without sleep. The subsequent investigation revealed the cause: a damaged wire inside oxygen tank number 2, the result of an incident during ground testing at the Kennedy Space Center. The wire's insulation had been burned away years before the mission ever launched. When Zweigert stirred the tank, the bare wire sparked, igniting the oxygen inside, a disaster that had been built into the spacecraft from the very beginning. No one walked on the moon during Apollo 13, but something arguably more important happened. We learned that we could fail and still find a way home. Jim Lovell is still alive as of this recording. He is 97 years old. He still looks up at the moon. This has been Of the World, Missions Beyond Earth. Look up tonight. The universe is still out there, waiting.